From template to turning blank. A turning blank is bigger than the template. The glue up follows the shape of the template. This is the glue up base view where you can see all the laminating that's been done. To save machine time, it's a very good idea to remove all the corners and to make the blank into an octagon. Best done on a table saw. With the corners removed, I'm starting to rough turn until the blank is round. I'm using a 40mm gouge to do it. As the work gets more rounded, I still carry on trimming and rounding off with the 40mm gouge. Moving on to rounding off the handle. The handle is part of the core piece of timber that goes all the way through to the base of the meal, and that's really important for strength of the actual club itself. There's quite a lot of timber to remove when you're rounding off the handle, and I'm using a 10mm parting tool to do this. Rough shaping the body of the meal. This is very important, and this is basically going to dictate the actual final shape. And what you can see that I'm doing is I've drawn in pencil lines spread out every 3 centimeters, and then I'm going to cut down to the depth required according to the template here. So continuing down to the base of the club, you can see that I've written all the measurements all the way down to make sure that I don't duplicate something or miss a measurement out, because that can cause a lot of problems, as you can imagine. And I'm still doing this with calipers and the 10mm parting tool. I have marked a lot of pencil lines around the rounded base of the meal. Each one of those lines signifies a different measurement and is going to help me curve the base when I come to doing it. It's very important that both the meals are exactly the same in shape, and therefore the precision of this operation is crucial. So now it's time to round off and shape the base steps, where I'm using a curved skew to cut the steps away to reveal the pencil lines that I've drawn in. Cutting a concave base means that the meal will have a steady footprint on the floor and it won't rock around as they sometimes do if they have a flat base. This is the final shape of the meal, which is stepped at the moment, and I'm marking in the pencil lines to serve as a guide to make sure that I follow the required shape. Coming to the last shaping stage, I'm running the skew blade along the meal and just literally taking off a minimal amount of wood now to smooth it out. And as I'm doing this, you'll see that the pencil lines will start getting very, very faint. And that's what we want before sanding starts. Moving on to the shoulder of the meal now and shaping it into where the handle is going to meet the actual club itself. Shaping the handle has to be really precise, and I'm moving down to a very narrow parting tool now to cut in the top and bottom of the handle itself, and the handle being cone shaped means that those measurements have got to be precise. Once the bulk has been removed from the handle with the gouge, the 15mm gouge, the final shaping is done with a straight edge skew. Shaping the button pommel. I'm drawing in the lines that are going to guide me through the shaping of the pommel itself. And it's very important to state here, even though that the shaping, the original shape is going to be hard edged, the sanding is going to finish the shape off, so the corners have got to be lightly rounded off. Even though the measurements for cutting the pommel are correct, I always like to do a final hand check every time I cut a meal. Next, I'm using 80 grit sandpaper to go down to the pencil lines but not remove them yet. And this is the first sanding that's going to happen. The next operation is to cut the beading, which is the 2 rings around the base and 1 up by the shoulder of the meal. Cutting V-shapes for the base beading. I've drawn 3 pencil lines according to the template, and each one of the pencil lines represents a V-shape, which is the outer side of each bead. So you can, if you look in between the pencil lines, you can see 2 spaces which are going to be curved over to create the bead itself. Now with the V-shapes done, I'm going to mark in a center line for each bead, and that's kind of like the top of the hill, and then I'm going to cut down into the V-shapes on both sides. Next, moving up to cutting the bead at the shoulder of the club. Starting with cutting the 2 V-shapes that I need, and then marking the center line of the bead and cutting down into the V-shapes from the center line. With the shaping of the meal complete, I'm starting to sand, starting with 80 grit, 120 grit, 180 grit and 240 grit. The piece of equipment that I'm using is sanding disc that's mounted inside a bearing that spins as the lathe is turning, and it automatically does it. It's a fantastic piece of equipment. My concern with earlier clubs that I've made has been that if you use a flat piece of sandpaper on a spinning club like this, the likelihood of scratch marks is quite big, and they're very hard to get rid of. With these sanding discs spinning like they do, you avoid this completely. Once the sanding is complete, I use shavings to burnish the clubs, which basically that means that it polishes the surface of the clubs and smooths everything out, and it's like a very, very fine sandpaper. Checking that the meals are identical is really important. And in this photograph, you can see that I have the two clubs side by side, checking that all the dimensions and the length and everything else is exactly the same. Wire burning. I like to wire burn the beading, and there's a very simple reason for that. This is also a work in progress, so I'm not quite sure exactly how I'm going to finish these meals off yet, and the burning gives me a point of reference. For example, if I want to paint the beading, then I know exactly where to stop with the paintbrush. So I decided to use blowtorch detailing. The blowtorch basically burns the surface of the meal, and I think it gives it a really nice patina and finish, kind of an old world look, but we're getting more into the sort of final design of the actual surface of the clubs themselves. I'm also thinking about painting the beading black now, and staining the meals a little bit darker, more of a sort of sandy golden type of color.